The mall pulsed with weekend chaos. Children laughing, shoppers rushing, loudspeakers blaring pop songs. Bags rustled, footsteps echoed, and neon sales signs flashed everywhere. But at the center of this glittering noise sat a man few cared to notice. His coat was torn, his shoes nearly broken, his face lined with years of hardship. Some glanced with disdain. "Probably homeless," a shopper muttered, steering her child away. A teenager raised his phone to record. Security, arms folded, watched him like a problem waiting to happen. The man didn't react. Instead, he placed trembling hands on the public piano before him. One note rang out, pure, deep, almost sacred. Shoppers stopped. Heads turned. The sound rose again, this time forming the start of a melody, soft yet commanding. And in that instant, the mall's chaos began to fall silent. Something extraordinary was about to unfold. The sound of that first note still lingered in the air as the man straightened his back. His thin frame framed by the polished grand piano the mall kept for guests. He looked out of place, and in truth his name was Daniel. Few people knew it and fewer cared. To the crowd, he was just another face worn down by life. A man with tired eyes and clothes that spoke of struggle. His coat was torn at the sleeves, and his shoes, cracked at the soles, told stories of too many miles walked with too little rest. People whispered, "Why is he sitting there?" a young man asked, smirking. "He shouldn't even be near that piano," a woman muttered, tugging her daughter away. The mall was a place of brightness and money, of new clothes and expensive coffees. Daniel, sitting quietly among them, seemed like a shadow cast where no one wanted shadows. The security guard shifted uneasily. His eyes narrowed. To him, Daniel wasn't a man but a potential disturbance. He tapped his radio, considering whether to call for backup. Yet Daniel sat there with quiet dignity, his gaze lowered. He didn't argue with the stares. He didn't defend himself against the whispers. Life had taught him long ago that people judge what they don't understand. What no one knew was that Daniel had carried music inside him for years. Notes, melodies, memories. Locked away, unheard. Each wrinkle on his hands wasn't just a mark of age, but of battles fought, jobs lost, and dreams deferred. And now, sitting at this glossy mall piano, he was moments away from revealing it. The shoppers didn't know his story. To them, he was just a shabby man intruding on their Saturday. But behind those weathered hands was a lifetime of training, sacrifice, and pain. A life that had once known promise before it was stripped away. Daniel glanced around the mall. For a moment, doubt flickered in his chest. Should he play? Should he risk the sneers, the mocking laughter? Then his gaze fell on a little boy standing nearby, wide-eyed, holding his mother's hand. The child wasn't frowning, wasn't judging. He was waiting, curious, expectant. And in that innocent face, Daniel found his answer. He placed both hands gently on the keys. The air grew still, like the world itself was waiting for him to begin. This wasn't just about playing a piano. This was about reclaiming something he thought was lost forever. The crowd didn't know it yet, but the man they ignored was about to give them a gift they would never forget. The first touch was hesitant, almost fragile. Daniel's fingers trembled, as if they weren't sure they still belonged on ivory keys. But the sound that escaped, the clarity of it, cut through the mall like sunlight piercing heavy clouds. Shoppers paused. The hurried rhythm of footsteps slowed. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. A young couple stopped at the railing above, leaning over to see where the music was coming from. Then Daniel played again. This time, the notes rolled into each other, no longer uncertain. His hands, though rough and calloused, moved with surprising grace. Years of practice, long buried, long denied, flowed back into him like they had never left. The mall's background noise, once overwhelming, seemed to retreat. The pounding bass of the pop song from the loudspeakers was drowned out by the simple, haunting melody Daniel created. At first, people looked confused. How could a man who looked like that play like this? A few even exchanged doubtful glances, whispering, "Is that really him? No, he must be faking it." But the melody grew stronger, weaving emotion into every corner of the open space. The teenagers who had been laughing before now raised their phones, recording not out of mockery but awe. The security guard, once ready to step forward, stood frozen in place, his frown slowly giving way to a look of reluctant curiosity. Daniel closed his eyes as he played, letting himself disappear into the music. Each note was more than sound, it was confession. His hardships, his loneliness, his silent dignity. All of it lived inside the melody, and somehow the crowd could feel it. A mother holding shopping bags shifted uncomfortably at first, but as the music deepened, her expression softened. Her little daughter tugged her arm. "Mom," the child whispered. "He's really good." The mother nodded slowly, almost ashamed she had judged him so quickly. Above, more people gathered along the second-floor railing. Down below, the circle around Daniel widened. Shoppers who had rushed minutes earlier now stood still, their weekend errands forgotten. The music had taken command, and with every note, Daniel's presence grew. Not the shabby man they had dismissed, but an artist, a storyteller, a soul too big to ignore. By the time his left hand joined in, layering depth beneath the melody, the mall had transformed. The noise, the sales, the chatter, they no longer mattered. Every ear, every heart was bent toward him. The first whispers of judgment had turned into silence, and silence into reverence. And yet, Daniel was only just beginning. The melody drifted higher, winding its way through the marble floors and glass railings of the mall. It was as if every corner, every echo, carried a piece of Daniel's soul. And in that moment, the people who stopped to listen began to change. A little boy sat cross-legged on the floor, his candy forgotten in his hand, eyes wide with wonder. His mother, who minutes earlier had tugged him away from the stranger, now found herself wiping at the corner of her eye. She looked at Daniel not with suspicion, but with something softer. Regret, maybe. Admiration. On the second floor, an elderly man gripped the railing with trembling hands. His lips parted, whispering, "Chopin?" as though he had been transported back to a memory of his youth, when he himself had once dreamed of playing. A teenage girl recording on her phone lowered it halfway, suddenly feeling that capturing it on video wasn't enough. She pressed her free hand against her chest, as if to steady the emotions stirring inside her. Even the businessman, the one who had rolled his eyes while sipping his overpriced coffee, set the cup down on the bench beside him. His expression had shifted. Gone was the indifference. His eyes were locked on Daniel, unblinking, as if he too were under the spell of the notes. And the security guard, the same man who had been ready to chase Daniel away, stood frozen, his stern posture melting into awe. The radio at his side buzzed, asking for an update, but he didn't respond. Instead, he whispered to himself, "I didn't expect this." Around Daniel, the circle grew wider. People who had been strangers now stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing glances, nodding silently at one another. They didn't know why this mattered so much, but they felt it. For a few minutes, the mall wasn't a place of shopping or rushing. It was a sanctuary, transformed by the touch of one man's worn hand. Daniel's eyes stayed closed, his head bowed slightly. To him, this wasn't a performance. It was prayer. It was confession. And though none of the crowd knew his story yet, they could feel the weight of it, threaded through every note, every pause, every swell of sound. No one saw him as homeless now. They saw him as something else entirely. A man with a gift too rare, too fragile to ignore. And with every passing second, the crowd leaned in closer, waiting, wondering. Who was he? Really? As Daniel's fingers danced over the keys, the melody grew, winding through the mall like a story told without words. Each note carried a weight, a fragment of a life the crowd could not yet see. And in that music lived memories, both bitter and beautiful, of a time long past. Daniel wasn't always the man they saw now. Years ago, he had walked a different path, one lined with possibility. He had been a young pianist, studying for hours under the dim light of a tiny apartment, dreaming of concert halls, standing ovations, and the kind of life that made people stop and listen. Not out of curiosity, but out of admiration. He remembered the first time he had played in front of an audience. The applause had filled him with warmth he could never describe, and for a moment, the world seemed endless, and anything felt possible. Music had been his companion, his solace, his escape from the harshness of life around him. But life has a way of turning dreams upside down, one misfortune after another. His family falling into debt, opportunities slipping away, sickness in the home, the constant grind of survival, had forced him to set the piano aside. What once had been passion became memory, tucked away beneath layers of bills, hunger, and exhaustion. Daniel had worked odd jobs for years. Janitor, delivery man, laborer, each one stripping him a little further from the life he once imagined. He had been invisible for so long, walking past bright shop windows, hearing laughter and music, feeling as if that world belonged to everyone but him. Yet inside, the music never left. It waited patiently, dormant but alive, like an ember in the ashes. He closed his eyes now as he played, letting the melody rise and fall with memories he had long suppressed. He remembered the long nights practicing alone, his fingers stiff from cold and hunger. He remembered teachers who had believed in him, the small competitions he had won, the pride in his mother's eyes. And he remembered the despair, the nights when hope seemed like a cruel joke. Each note carried these memories. Each pause was a confession. Every chord he struck now was a bridge between the man he had been and the man he was today. Tired, worn, but not broken. For the crowd, Daniel was just a shabby man at a mall piano. But in truth, he was a reservoir of experience, grief, and artistry. Every observer could feel it, though they didn't yet know why their hearts ached and soared all at once. As the melody continued, Daniel felt something he hadn't in years. A flicker of pride, a reminder that his gift had survived, even if the world had almost forgotten him. He wasn't performing for recognition or reward. He was playing because the music demanded it, because his life demanded it, because some part of him needed to be seen and heard. And in that moment, the mall became more than a place of commerce. It became a stage for redemption, a sanctuary for truth, a place where the invisible could finally be noticed. The crowd would soon realize that the man before them was no ordinary stranger. But for now, all that mattered was that Daniel's music had begun to tell the story of a life lived, suffered, and yet unbowed. The music was no longer just notes floating in the air. It had become a language. Every shopper, every passerby, felt it reverberate through their chest, tugging at something they didn't fully understand. Eyes that had once narrowed in suspicion now widened in wonder. Conversations had long since stopped. Only the melody remained. In the crowd, a young woman froze, her shopping bags hanging forgotten at her sides. She stared at Daniel, her fingers gripping the strap of her purse, pale with shock. There was something unmistakable about the piece, something hauntingly familiar. She whispered under her breath, almost in disbelief, That's his song. He wrote it. She had remembered it from years ago, a composition she had studied in music school, performed in competitions, and admired in recordings. The memory of his signature melody, the arcing crescendo, the subtle pauses that made it ache with emotion, was etched into her mind. Her heart raced. Could it really be him? Could this ragged man, sitting in tattered clothes, be the same genius composer whose music had inspired her own career? She glanced at those around her. Faces reflected the same confusion and awe, though no one yet knew why. She whispered again, this time louder, "He's the composer. He's Daniel Morales, the one they said disappeared years ago." A ripple went through the crowd. Smartphones that had been raised to record had now paused, faces craning to see him more clearly. Even the teenagers who had laughed earlier exchanged glances, their smirks replaced by awe. The security guard's stern expression faltered entirely. He stepped back, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch. Something about the recognition, the weight of a past life meeting the present, held him in place. Parents held children closer, whispering, "Do you see? Do you hear?" That's real music. Even shop clerks emerged from doorways, leaning forward, caught by the invisible gravity of Daniel's story unfolding in real time. Daniel, unaware of the whispers around him, played on. His eyes remained closed. His hands traced the keys with the memory of every struggle, every heartbreak, every moment that had pushed him to the brink and yet refused to extinguish his talent. The music was no longer just a performance. It was revelation. For the first time in years, the world was seeing him. Not the homeless man, not the shadow in a crowded mall, but the brilliant, unbroken soul he had always been. And as the crowd's astonishment began to ripple through the mall, the first hints of a realization emerged. Sometimes, genius doesn't vanish. Sometimes it waits, quiet, patient, until the world is ready to listen again. And in that instant, Daniel's story had just begun to unfold before hundreds of eyes, and thousands more would soon hear it. Daniel's hands flew over the keys, each note more confident than the last, weaving a story that no words could capture. The melody had grown from a tentative whisper to a sweeping declaration, filling the mall with a resonance so pure that even the background noise, the chatter, the music from loudspeakers, the rustle of shopping bags, faded into nothing. The little boy on the floor leaned forward, eyes wide, as if he could catch the notes themselves in his hands. His mother stood behind him, tears brimming, gripping his shoulders. For a moment, she forgot everything else. The errands, the rushing, the judgment she had passed just minutes before. All that existed was the music and the man who had created it. The teenagers had lowered their phones entirely. Their laughter, their mockery, all gone. A shop clerk had pressed a hand to her mouth, awed, and a businessman who had scowled at the sight of Daniel now looked completely undone. Even the security guard had stepped back, arms folded, eyes locked on Daniel as though trying to memorize every movement. He had prepared to enforce rules, to maintain order, but the music had rendered him powerless. Daniel's final chord rose like a crescendo of emotion, lingering in the air, vibrating through marble and glass. Time seemed suspended. The notes hung like droplets of sunlight, shimmering, impossible to ignore. And then, silence. For a heartbeat, the mall held its breath. The shoppers, the children, the employees, the guards, they all sat or stood frozen, suspended in awe. The music had ended, but its echo lingered, filling every corner, every heart. And then the applause broke. It started slowly, uncertainly, a single clap from a woman at the edge of the crowd, then another and another until the entire mall erupted. Hands slapped together, some covering mouths in disbelief, some waving in sheer joy. People cheered, laughed, cried. Phones recorded frantically, but nothing could capture the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Daniel lowered his head, breath coming in gentle, uneven waves. He didn't smile yet, not yet. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, for a moment, the world had stopped noticing the labels, the clothes, the appearances. They had only heard the music. The little boy clapped furiously, and Daniel finally lifted his eyes to meet his gaze. A small, almost shy smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. In that exchange, the unspoken message was clear. The invisible can become seen. The unheard can be celebrated. And one song can remind a crowd of the beauty of humanity. And as the echo of applause filled the mall, Daniel knew this was just the beginning. Something far greater than admiration was unfolding, a recognition of the man behind the music. The crowd had witnessed the end of the song, but the beginning of his story. The applause had barely faded when the first video clips began to appear online. A teenager had captured Daniel's performance on her phone, shaky hands betraying her excitement. Within hours, it was everywhere. Shared across social media platforms, reshared, commented on, and praised. The mall's visitors who had witnessed it in person could hardly believe how quickly the world had discovered him. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines flashed, "Homeless pianist stuns mall crowd with masterpiece," and "Forgotten genius performs in public, leaves audience in tears." Within a single day, Daniel Morales, the name few remembered, was trending, becoming a symbol of hope and hidden talent everywhere. Offers began pouring in. Music schools invited him to teach. Orchestras sent messages, asking for private performances. Charities reached out, offering support, housing, and opportunities to share his music with the world. But Daniel remained humble. He didn't seek fame or fortune. What mattered most was that people had finally heard him, truly heard him, in a way he hadn't been heard for years. The mall, once just a stage for commerce, had become a portal to his new life. Local reporters and bloggers arrived, hoping to capture his story. Daniel politely declined interviews at first, focusing instead on the piano that had become a bridge between his past and present. The crowd who had witnessed him live returned, visiting again and again, eager to experience the quiet power of his music firsthand. Even the security guard, who had once been skeptical, smiled as Daniel passed him in the hall, nodding respectfully. Something had shifted. A simple performance had rewritten expectations, transformed perceptions, and restored dignity. Social media amplified the story further. Millions of views, thousands of comments filled with admiration, empathy, and wonder. People were sharing the video with captions like, "Never judge a book by its cover," and "Hidden talent exists everywhere." The story resonated across boundaries, touching people who had never set foot in that mall. Through it all, Daniel remained grounded. He played, he smiled shyly, and he thanked those who had gathered. For him, the applause, the viral fame, and the opportunities were secondary. What mattered was connection. The moment when people stopped seeing his torn coat or frayed shoes and began seeing his heart, his art, and the resilience that had carried him through the years. For Daniel, the world was finally listening. And what started as a single melody in a bustling mall had become a movement, inspiring hope, empathy, and the reminder that greatness can be found where least expected. The applause had faded, but its echo lingered in Daniel's chest like a heartbeat he had almost forgotten. The mall, once a place of noise and indifference, had become a stage for transformation. Not just for him, but for everyone who had paused to listen. News of his performance spread rapidly. Videos of Daniel at the mall went viral, shared by thousands, then millions. Social media buzzed with comments, "Hidden talent exists everywhere. Never judge a book by its cover. This man's music will stay with me forever." Offers followed. Music schools invited him to teach. Orchestras asked for private performances. Charities offered housing, support, and opportunities to share his gift widely. Daniel accepted, but carefully. He did not want fame. He had survived years of judgment and neglect. What mattered to him now was purpose. He wanted to play, to teach, to inspire. The piano had always been his sanctuary, and now it could be a bridge for others. Children gathered around him in classrooms and small concert halls, wide-eyed and eager. He guided their hands over the keys, showing them that music was not just about talent. It was about patience, persistence, and belief in oneself. Even if no one notices at first, he told them softly, "Your heart and your dedication will speak louder than words." Parents watched in awe, sometimes tearing up as they realized the depth of his wisdom. He spoke not only about music but about life, about resilience, humility, and the quiet strength required to continue despite hardship. Every note he played carried the weight of his own struggles, making the children feel seen, valued, and inspired. Even the security guard who had once prepared to confront him now approached with a humble smile. "I judged you too quickly," he admitted. "I'll never forget this day." Daniel only nodded, letting the gesture pass without fanfare. The mall became a symbol of possibility. Crowds returned not just to witness a performance, but to experience connection and hope. The contrast was striking. People who had once ignored him now listened with rapt attention, realizing that true brilliance is often found where it is least expected. For Daniel, this was not the culmination. It was the beginning of something far greater. Each note, each lesson, each smile he received from the children and strangers alike reinforced a simple truth. Dignity and talent are not measured by appearance or circumstance. As he sat down at the piano once more, the crowd leaning in around him, Daniel's eyes reflected a quiet joy. He had reclaimed his purpose, and in doing so, offered a spark of hope to a world that desperately needed it. This was his new beginning, and it belonged to everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or doubted. The mall had quieted once more. Daniel's hands rested gently on the piano keys, the final chords still vibrating faintly in the air. Around him, shoppers, children, parents, and passers-by remained silent, still processing the experience they had just witnessed. It was more than a performance. It had been a revelation. The man they had first dismissed as shabby and insignificant had reminded them of something fundamental: that worth cannot always be measured by appearances, and that talent, hope, and dignity often reside in the most unexpected places. For Daniel, the applause, the cameras, and the social media attention were not the goal. They were merely the byproducts of something far more profound. What mattered to him was connection. Connecting with people through music, through emotion, and through shared humanity. As he looked at the crowd, he realized that the moment he had longed for as a child, the moment when someone would truly listen, had finally arrived, not just once, but for everyone present. Every face in the crowd told a story. The little boy sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide and sparkling, reminded Daniel of himself as a child. Curious, full of wonder, and unafraid to dream. The mother beside him, who had initially pulled him away with caution, now clutched her chest as tears rolled down her cheeks. She had learned something profound in those few minutes: that judgment could blind, but openness could illuminate. The teenager who had first mocked him now stared in awe, her phone lowered, her laughter silenced by recognition of a talent she had underestimated. Even the security guard, once ready to intervene, now wore a soft smile, humbled by the experience of witnessing true artistry. As Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him here, he thought of the years of hardship he had endured, the relentless struggle to survive, the nights spent in loneliness, the jobs that drained him physically and emotionally. These were not just obstacles. They had been shaping forces. Each hardship had deepened his understanding of life, resilience, and the power of patience. Each setback had added depth to his music, infusing it with emotion that only someone who had lived through real struggle could convey. It was this authenticity that resonated with the crowd. In a world obsessed with appearances, speed, and instant gratification, Daniel's music reminded everyone that the most profound beauty often comes from patience, dedication, and humility. People were moved not because of flash or spectacle, but because of truth. Truth expressed in each note, each pause, each rise and fall of the melody. And as the videos of Daniel's performance spread online, reaching viewers far beyond the mall, the lesson became universal. Strangers from different cities, countries, and backgrounds were touched. Comments poured in. "I cried watching this. He reminded me to never give up. There's hope in the world if people like him still exist." The story of a man once overlooked, now celebrated, transcended borders, languages, and circumstances. It spoke to something essential: that every human being has value, every talent has its place, and every act of courage, even a simple act of sharing your gift, can ripple outward in ways impossible to measure. Daniel's journey also highlighted the transformative power of empathy. For the people in the mall, witnessing his performance challenged their assumptions and judgments. They had been quick to dismiss him based on appearance, yet their hearts had been opened by the music. The experience reminded them, and everyone watching, that human connection often requires pausing, observing, and listening deeply. It is in those moments that we recognize the dignity and worth of others. Perhaps the most enduring lesson was one of hope. Daniel's story illustrated that life's circumstances do not define a person's potential. Adversity can shape but not destroy the human spirit. Talent, when nurtured and shared, has the power to transcend obstacles, change perceptions, and inspire entire communities. His music, born from struggle, became a bridge between worlds, between the overlooked and the powerful, between despair and joy, between isolation and recognition. As Daniel gently closed the piano lid, the crowd erupted once more in applause. But this time, the response was different. It was not just admiration for skill, it was gratitude. Gratitude for the reminder that greatness can emerge from anywhere, that kindness and recognition can transform lives, and that one person's courage to embrace their gift can awaken hope in countless others. The mall, which had begun the day as a place of noise and distraction, was transformed into a sanctuary of reflection, empathy, and shared humanity. And Daniel, once invisible, now undeniably seen, continued on his journey, not for fame, but for the quiet mission of touching lives with his music. The moral was clear: never underestimate anyone, for every person carries within them a story, a gift, and a potential that can change the world. Appearances are deceiving, struggle often hides brilliance, and acts of courage, no matter how small, can inspire hearts in ways impossible to predict. In the end, Daniel's melody was more than music. It was a testament to resilience, hope, and the enduring power of humanity. The crowd dispersed, but the lesson lingered. When we choose to see, listen, and believe in others, we allow extraordinary moments to unfold. And for everyone who witnessed Daniel at the piano, the world would never quite seem the same again.